story happened a few years back when I was in 8th grade. I was staying at my grandmother's house for a week while my parents went out of town for business. My parents both worked at the same company, and about 3 or 4 times a year they would go out of town. When they did, me and my sister, who was 8, would always stay with my grandmother. She lived on the other side of town. What I mostly did when I stayed at her house was play video games the whole time. I didn't mind it. I stayed in a guest room, and my sister stayed in another guest room. One night, I was playing Call of Duty at about 10 p.m. I had my headset on and was trying to be quiet because my grandmother went to bed at 9. I was just about to start another game when I thought I heard a noise come from my room. I lifted up my headset and looked around, expecting to see my sister, but I saw nothing. I went back to my game and forgot all about it. About 10 minutes later, I heard my sister screaming. I paused the game and went to her room to see what was wrong. She told me that she saw a man in her doorway, and then he walked into the basement. I was a little concerned to hear this, but I also didn't really believe it. I told her I would look in the basement to make sure there was no man. So I opened the door and began walking down the stairs. The light switch to the basement was at the bottom of the stairs, so I had to go all the way down to turn it on. When I got to the end, I reached for the light switch and turned it on. I immediately saw a man staring right at me about 10 feet away. I sprinted back up the stairs at full speed and slammed the door. Then I ran to my sister's room and took her to my grandmother's that was right next to it. We got in and locked the door. It was the only bedroom that had a lock on it, and thankfully my grandmother had left it unlocked that night. Right after I locked the door shut behind me, we heard the basement door slowly open. My grandmother started to wake up and asked what was going on. My sister told her to be quiet and then whispered to her. I stayed by the door. I heard the man's feet walking down the hall to the living room and then the kitchen. He was walking pretty slowly. I saw that my grandmother got the phone to call the police. I listened to the man and heard him slam something pretty hard in the kitchen. Then he walked back to the living room and towards the hallway where we were hiding. He stayed walking at a slow pace the entire time. Then I heard him go into my room and then next door to my sister's room. When he left her room, my heart started beating like crazy. He walked out and right in front of my grandmother's doorway and then tried opening the door. When he realized it was locked, he tried again 2 or 3 more times. Then everything went silent for about 5 seconds. After that, I heard a huge bang on the bottom of the door. I backed away from it and whispered to my grandmother when the police would arrive. She said about 5 minutes. I felt like we didn't have that kind of time. I looked around the room for something I could use as a weapon, but saw nothing. Then I heard another loud bang from the door. The man had to be kicking it. I grabbed a lamp from my grandmother's dresser and took the shade off of it. I decided if the man broke into the room, I was going to hit him in the head with the lamp. I positioned the dresser a couple more feet to the left and then stood on top of it. But then I heard his footsteps walking away. Everything went silent for about a minute. I started to feel relief and thought maybe he was leaving. But then I heard his footsteps coming back. Once the man got right outside of our door, he finally spoke. He said he was going to give us 30 seconds to come out before he broke his way in. I was standing there shaking with the lamp in my hand, waiting for him to break the door down. I didn't answer him. Suddenly, I heard sirens of police. Then I heard the man run away, and I heard a few loud noises of things falling down. And then I heard commotion outside. We waited in the room and then came out to see police everywhere. The man had been caught, but not before doing some damage and making a big mess in the house. I didn't stay at my grandmother's house again, and she ended up moving about 3 months later. For some background on this story, I'm a 20-year-old female. This took place 3 years ago when I was in high school. My best friend's name is Amanda, and when we were in high school, we used to hang out at each other's houses all the time. The nice thing about our houses was that we only lived about a mile from each other, and our neighborhoods were separated by just a little woods and a river that ran through our city. To get to her house was just about a 15-minute walk on a path through the woods. It was nice because I didn't need to drive. On this day, we hung out after school at Amanda's house, and at about 9 p.m., I left to go home. It was dark out, and it was a little creepy to walk through the woods at night because it was a pretty dense woods, but I had done it several times before and nothing ever happened, so I wasn't too worried. I walked about 5 minutes down the path when it started to rain. I began jogging so that I would get home faster. Then I approached a turn on the path, and when I went around the corner, I was surprised to see a man just standing there barely off the path. I froze in my place. He was wearing a jacket with the hood up and was just standing there looking down. It just gave me a bad feeling, and I didn't really want to walk past him. He didn't look at me at all, though. I don't know if he noticed me. Maybe because of the rain, he couldn't hear me. I stood there for about 10 seconds deciding whether I should walk past him or not, but I decided to go back to my friends and ask her to give me a ride home. As soon as I started walking the other direction, I heard the man start to move. I walked at a fast pace and looked over my shoulder and saw him turning the corner. Then I started to run. If I ran, it would only take me about a minute to get back. I just hoped the man wasn't chasing me. I ran all the way back to my friend's house without looking back. When I made it, I knocked on her door like crazy. She came to the door and asked me what was wrong. I told her that I thought a man had been following me in the woods. She said that she would give me a ride home, but as we were about to head out the door, we saw the man in the street in front of her house. He still had his hood up, and we really couldn't make out his face. Unfortunately, Amanda's parents were not home, and we didn't know what to do. The man just stood there and didn't move. We debated calling the police, but he wasn't on her property, so we didn't know if there was anything that could really be done. We just waited it out. He would occasionally pace back and forth a little bit, but pretty much just stood there. Finally, about an hour later, we saw him walk away for good. We waited another 10 minutes before leaving. I was able to get home safely, but I never took the woods home again. Years ago, I moved into a new house due to switching locations for work. It was a temporary thing, so I would only be living there for about a year, but I still put a lot of effort into finding a nice house for a good price. The house was about 40 years old that I found. It looked pretty nice and had what I was looking for at a good deal, and I was able to get it. When I moved in, I was really enjoying it, until about a week into living there. It was a Friday afternoon, and I noticed a car drive down my street really slow and then park right across the street from me. I didn't have neighbors across the street, so it was a little concerning to see a car parked there. I waited to see if the person would get out, but they didn't. They just sat there. I saw them turn their head and look at me. I couldn't make out the details, but I saw that it appeared to be a man. I decided to forget about it and went back to what I was doing. But when I came back about 20 minutes later, the car was still there with the man, and he was looking at my house. We made eye contact for a split second, and then he drove away. I thought it was suspicious, but it wasn't a big deal. I tried to forget about it, but the next day the car came back again. He did basically the same thing, just sat there watching my house. Then he drove away about 20 minutes later. There was a few days where I didn't see it, but then it came back a third time. This time I decided to go out and confront whoever it was. But when I walked out of my house towards the car, it immediately drove away. I went back inside after that. Later that night, I was watching TV when I heard glass breaking. It came from my basement and from the back side of my house. I immediately suspected a break-in, and I suspected that man, of course, so I called the police. I ran to my room and shut the door. I heard the man start to walk up my stairs and get closer. I shouted from my doorway that I called the police to try to scare him off. Instead, he screamed, saying, "Where is she?" at the top of his lungs. I was pretty confused. Then he cursed at me. I shouted that I had a gun. I really didn't, but I was hoping that that would work to scare him off. Instead, he responded by telling me to shoot him then, and he started banging on my door and trying to open it. I figured the man had to be insane, and I knew the police would arrive soon, so I decided to climb out the window of my room. I opened it and jumped out. It wasn't that far of a drop, and I was able to jog across my backyard to the next street over. I waited and didn't hear anything. I figured the man was still in my house. Then I started to hear sirens coming from the distance. I waited about a minute, and then I felt it was safe to go back. When I arrived back at my house, I saw police everywhere, and they had taken the man into custody. I talked to the police, and they showed me that the man had broken my door off the hinges to my bedroom. He also caused some damage inside the room. I figured the man was just crazy until I got a phone call a couple days later. It was from the previous owner of the house. She started apologizing to me over and over again. She said that the man that broke into my house was her crazy ex-boyfriend. She told me she left him about a year ago because of his drug addiction, and she moved because he had violated a restraining order against her by stalking her. She didn't let him know that she moved out, of course, so he thought that she still lived at my house.